Welcome to the end of Sophie and Jumong, Part 41. Subscribe for new full stories that will not be in parts, but rather from beginning to the end. Next story is dropping in soon. Thank you. Back in Amman, inside the secure viewing chamber of the royal palace, King stood in silence, eyes glued to the massive screen that broadcast the operation room live. The camera, as arranged, showed the full room, from Sophie hunched over the chest cavity to the attending Korean staff, to the Omani doctor who had traveled with the prince and now stood silently at the far side of the room, eyes wide with helpless anxiety. The king watched it all. He saw the blood. He saw the monitors flash red. He saw Sophie raise her hand, and he saw the numbers fall. A tightness gripped his chest. He clutched the edge of the table, swaying slightly. One of his guards stepped forward. "Your Majesty." The king shook his head, refusing to leave. "Not my son," he whispered. "Please, not my son." Inside the operation room, time fractured. The sound of the monitor's alarm, a flat, unbroken tone, filled the space like a scream, trapped in machinery. Prince Hamza's body had gone still. The oxygen saturation on the screen blinked violently in red. 60%? 58%? 52%. A nurse whispered, "He's crashing." Sophie didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the open cavity, her mind sharpened, cutting through fear like a light through fog. "Vascular forceps," she ordered, "and compress the airway manually. I need to see the trachea now." One of the junior doctors hesitated. "It's collapsed. If we move wrong, it'll rupture." "If we don't move now," Sophie snapped, "he dies." Dr. Yoon reached forward without pause, gently pressing the airway with 2 fingers. The tube trembled in place, struggling to hold its shape. Sophie leaned in, her gloved hands now deep in the boy's chest. Her back ached. Her knees screamed. She was leaning too long, too hard. Sweat beaded beneath her mask. "Lord," she prayed silently, "don't let this be the moment he slips. Not this boy, not after coming this far. Be in my hands." The surgical lights bore down on her. The nurse passed her the next tool. Sophie inserted a small temporary stent, thin, metallic, angled. As soon as it clicked into place, air hissed through the tube like a gasp from the lungs of God. The monitor beeped once, then again. A slow, weak beat returned. "Heart rhythm returning," the anesthesiologist said. "Oxygen rising." 72. Sophie didn't stop. She applied pressure, stitching the ends of the severed arch with fluid, practiced motion. Her eyes scanned every tiny thread, every layer of muscle and vessel, as if they were sentences in a divine scripture she alone could read. Across the room, the Omani doctor stepped forward unconsciously, drawn toward the table. His mouth was slightly open. He had known the boy since birth. The child of a monarch, yes. But more than that, the child of a man who had whispered bedtime prayers and kissed fevers away. Now watching Sophie's hands move like water, controlled, unshaking, persistent. He felt the first fragile flicker of hope. Back in Amman, the king had dropped into a chair. His chest heaved with shallow breaths. The camera in the room now zoomed slightly. He could see Sophie's posture, see her request something. He saw the nurse hesitate, then rush. He saw blood again. He heard the alarm, the red flashing numbers, and then he saw the oxygen climb. 70, 75, 80. The king pressed a trembling hand over his eyes. His advisor leaned forward. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "he's not lost yet." The king said nothing. His lips moved, but no sound came. Inside the operation room, Sophie knew they were past the worst point, but not yet safe. Her legs burned now. She had stood too long. The weight of her child pulled against her spine, and her balance began to falter. Her arms remained steady, but her lower body cried for relief. She inhaled, then said, "Nurse, I need a stool." The request froze the room for a heartbeat. It was unheard of. No surgeon sat in the middle of an operation. The nurse looked to Doctor. Minister Dr. Min didn't move. Sophie raised her voice. "Now!" That one word carried the force of thunder. The nurse moved, wheeled the stool from the corner, and gently slid it behind Sophie. She sat down slowly, kept her arms high, never breaking from her field. "I'm fine," she said, and began stitching again. The room returned to motion. Dr. Min watched her from across the table, eyes unreadable. What he saw was not weakness. It was strength in its purest, most human form. Pain acknowledged, but duty unshaken. The final sutures were placed. The chest cavity was rinsed, checked. No active bleeding. Vitals stable, the anesthesiologist confirmed. Blood pressure 88/56. Oxygen 94. Sophie looked up briefly. Drain in. Close the cavity. As her team stepped in to finish, Sophie leaned back, wiped her forehead with her arm, and whispered softly above the boy's chest. "Live, young man. Live fully." She pulled off her gloves with slow, steady hands. Then her mask. Sweat traced her jawline. She stepped back from the table. Every eye in the room was on her. Back in Amman, the king saw the final screen flash. Greater than procedure complete. Vitals stable. Surgical lead. Dr. Sophie Lee. He didn't move. He stood slowly, walked to the edge of the table, and placed a hand against the screen. His son was alive. The corridor outside the operation room had fallen into a respectful hush. Word had already spread through the hospital. The prince had made it. The surgery was successful. But Sophie didn't leave right away. She moved with calm through the corridors, stopping only briefly to check in on the ICU team before following Jumong toward the executive wing. The hospital had a presidential suite, usually reserved for foreign dignitaries or top hospital guests. That night, Sophie was offered the room. She had refused at first, but Jumong insisted. She was carrying their child. She had just saved another. She needed comfort. The suite was quiet and warm, its walls soundproofed from the rest of the busy hospital. There were fresh towels, soft bedding, and a small table already laid with food she didn't touch. Sophie showered slowly, then lay on the wide bed. Her body ached from hours of standing, but her mind, strangely, was light. Jumong sat beside her, brushing her damp hair from her forehead. She closed her eyes and finally, she slept. It was 2 a.m. when the hush of midnight in the presidential suite gave way to stirring. Sophie lay curled beneath a soft white duvet, her breathing slow and even. Around her, the low hum of the hospital's air filtration system and distant nighttime rounds provided a gentle lullaby. Jumong, seated on the chaise not far from the bed, kept watch, his hand resting lightly on the armrest. His expression was tense but loving. Then her eyes fluttered. She began to whisper, words tangled with fear, with worry. "No, don't push him. Don't push him." Her breath hitched. Her body tensed. In vivid darkness, she was running down an endless marble hall. Her shoes clicked loudly against the polished floor. At the end of the hall, the walls soared upward, glowing under chandeliers. There, the King of Jordan stood, golden thobes shimmering in the distant torchlight, crying out, voice raw, "Sophie, don't let him die!" She turned to see a pale-faced nurse in white, anxiously pushing Hamza, limp in a hospital bed, faster and faster down the corridor, as though to a furnace waiting at its end. A male doctor appeared then, ashen-faced, turning his head away. Anesthetist monitors squealed futility. Sophie tried to scream, but no sound would come. In the dream, the boy's eyes fluttered open, dark, pleading. "Mummy, help me." Exploding in emotion, Sophie fought forward, but her legs failed her. She reached out, tried to stop them, but they slipped on polished floors. She heard metal casters, the jangle of IV poles, the flattening of monitors. She reached, but the world tilted. The king's silhouette dissolved. The nurse's hand slipped. The boy fell silent. A sudden heartbeat echoed. Then she awoke. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She gasped, sitting upright. Jumong immediately sat up too, draping an arm across her shoulders. "Sophie?" he asked softly. She could barely form words. There was a dream. The king was crying and begging me not to let him. He fell." Her voice cracked. He held her close, steadying her racing heartbeat, as though he could withdraw her fear with his hand. "It's past midnight," he said in soothing tones. "Breathe." She continued to shake, words tumbling. "That nurse, the one who hesitated. She was pushing the prince, even as monitors fell flat. And in the dream, they said she poisoned him." Something dark and unthinkable curled like smoke around Jumong's heart. "Did you dream it?" She nodded, falling silent then. She pressed her lips together, breathing in the cool air. The suite's lights were low, but she could feel them flickering against her eyelids, powerless to comfort her. "What do we do?" he asked softly. Jumong rose swiftly, pulling on a robe and grabbing his phone from the side table. He needed eyes in the hospital. He needed protection. He dialed Elias, barely awake but ready. "Elias, it's urgent. Contact Mira. KO with the necessary tools and waiting for you. Use the back door to the presidential suite of the hospital." On arrival, Mira Ko entered through the discreet staff door. Elias waited outside. She carried a small black bag, hacking tools, and a laptop. Inside, surveillance monitors flashed. ICU, hallway, operation room cameras, mundane scenes. Then the OR feed from Sophie's surgery. Sterile, focused, controlled. Mira Ko whispered to Elias, "Begin network access." She typed swiftly, credentials codes. They came from Jumong's advanced privileges. Almost instantly, cameras activated across ICU, hallways, even staff break rooms. Audio channels came online, soft, legal, given confidentiality. Keywords loaded: Sophie, stool, med, poison, heart. In the back room, Jumong guided her. "Rabbit camera 3, angle on Dr. Kwan, Dr. Yu, EVP channel." She retrieved audio files, silence stretched, then whispers. From the OR feed, low voices leaked. "Dr. Kwan, she's too fast." Dr. Yu, "Slow them down, she's overreaching." And a soft voice from a nurse. "Nurse, quiet. If it goes poorly, it'll stain her reputation." Mira Ko flagged timestamps. Elias took notes. Late night, Sophie reclined in the presidential suite. Elias, Jumong, and Mira Ko gathered. Quietly, professionally. "What is it?" she asked softly. Elias swallowed. He cleared his throat and then explained in low, careful words. "It's Nurse Shin," he said. "We intercepted a call. She spoke with a doctor from Central Hospital. They discussed adding something to the stitching solution during the surgery." Sophie's breath caught. Jumong moved toward her and placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and soothing. Jumong spoke calmly. "They said he'll crash in 72 hours. They admitted it was deliberate." Sophie's eyes widened. Her hands trembled. She stared at Elias. "Why would—" Mira Ko stepped forward. "They used a cardiotoxic medication. Something that shows no effect immediately, but weakens the heart over time." She opened her tablet and played the recording. The nurse's voice echoed, "Yes, I used it. I mixed it in the stitching solution. Within 3 days, the heart will weaken." Sophie gripped the windowsill. Her mind snapped back to the operating theater. She remembered that moment. She had been exhausted, fatigued. Yet her hands had remained steady. She remembered asking for a stool and the nurse's hesitation as the room spun around her. Her legs had burned. Fatigue pressed into her spine like a weight. She had questioned the staff, the hesitation. Now it all came rushing back with terrible clarity. Sophie closed her eyes and leaned forward, her breath rasping in her chest. "This is betrayal," she whispered, voice shaking. "A plan to ruin my work, to kill the boy." Jumong knelt before her, steadying. "We need to act quickly." "You trusted your instincts, Sophie. We'll do everything to protect him." Sophie's eyes glistened with tears. She looked at Mira Ko and Elias, then back at Jumong. With her hesitation, "I knew something was off," she said finally. Jumong handed her a tissue. "You were right. You saved him twice already." Sophie's shoulders shook. She tried to calm herself. Sweat formed on her brow as she exhaled slowly. "I need to confirm it," she said. "We need a blood test. Immediately." She rose to her full height, the lines of exhaustion etched on her face. Her voice was firm despite her shock. "We need Gina." Everyone held their breath for a moment. Elias nodded. "Gina is on her way," he said quietly. "I called her as soon as we knew." Sophie closed her eyes, steadied herself, and looked at Jumong. "I trust her," she said. "She's a pharmacist. She knows toxicology. We need her to analyze the blood, find the antidote, fast." Jumong nodded again and squeezed her hand. Mira Ko set a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "You did the right thing," Mira Ko said softly. Sophie inhaled deep, drawing her resolve from her baby, from all the lives depending on her. "Let's save him," she said quietly, voice low. "Let's make sure they can't hurt him anymore." They all moved in unison. Jumong beside Sophie, Elias pulling up the lab access screen, and Mira Ko preparing encrypted links to the lab results. Sophie's gaze returned to the window. Outside, the city lights twinkled as though nothing had happened. But inside, everything had changed. She whispered, "First the blood test, then Gina. I need answers." Jumong pressed a hand across her wrist. "And we'll be ready," he said, his voice full of quiet conviction. Sophie closed her eyes, a final moment of prayer passing her lips for the boy. "I'm ready," she said. And together they stepped into the next phase of the fight. Gina, a calm and focused pharmacist, arrived in time and entered through the staff entrance. She carried a small black medical kit and a hospital ID badge. Her eyes were determined and steady. Elias met her at the door, quietly escorting her to the security room, where Sophie, Jumong, and Mira Ko waited with tense anticipation. "Gina," Sophie said quietly, relief washing over her face. Gina nodded. "I got your message." She set down her kit and joined Sophie at the laptop. Jumong and Mira Ko stepped back, giving them space. Sophie tapped the audio transcript showing Nurse Shin's confession of using a dose causing heart failure in 72 hours. She pointed to the screen and said, "We need to know what this was." Gina examined the transcript and socket data. The toxin described is a modified calcium channel inhibitor, something acting like an agrin-based compound, low-level, slow release, targeting the heart. Sophie frowned in understanding. "Could we test the child's blood for it right away?" Gina nodded. "Definitely. And I can prepare an antidote, but I'll need the actual blood test to determine dosage." They moved together to the ICU. Sophie opened the door gently. Bed lights were dim. The prince lay sleeping, sedated from post-operative care. Sophie motioned to the nurse. "We need blood, 2 vials, 1 for cardiac panel, 1 for toxin assay." The nurse moved quickly. Sophie placed a hand on the prince's shoulder. He lay still. "I want another line if you can," Sophie added. As backup, the nurse nodded, and Sophie, together with Gina, left the ICU corridor. Outside, in the lab hallway, Gina walked briskly to the hospital lab. She carried the vials with a quiet urgency and handed them to the lab tech. Run toxin assay on sample B and cardiac markers on sample A. Call me with results first. Minutes felt like hours. Sophie paced outside the lab, breathing slowly to stay calm. At 5 minutes, the lab tech emerged. It's positive, she said. 0.2 micrograms per milliliter, cardiotoxic levels. We tested for the modified calcium channel compound. The first bloodline shows early effects on the myocardium, too. Sophie's heart sank. Gina took a deep breath. They definitely used that poison, Gina confirmed. Now we can calculate the antidote. Gina returned to the OR prep room. Sophie met her there. The room was dim, lit by a single overhead medical light. Gina began gathering calcium gluconate 10% concentration magnesium, sulfate, solution, blood pressure stabilizers. She measured doses carefully based on the toxin level in the blood. This mix is precise, she explained. We base it on 0.2 micrograms per milliliter. He'll get 4 milligrams of calcium gluconate and 2 milligrams of magnesium per kilogram body weight. Sophie nodded. And I will administer it. Gina handed her the syringe. Remember, Gina warned quietly, this will push him into a deep coma. Minimum 4 hours, possibly up to 6. He may not respond until morning, but it resets the heart. Sophie's eyes were steady. I accept. She examined the syringe. They returned to the ICU. Sophie posted a note on the door. Emergency infusion. Cardiac toxin reversal. Do not disturb. Inside, the prince's monitor showed a slow, steady heartbeat, but low variability. Sophie knelt beside the bed. Gina connected the syringe to the IV line. Ready? Sophie asked. Gina's voice was firm. Ready. Sophie injected the antidote slowly. The line glowed as the mixture entered his bloodstream. Within seconds, a faint rise in heart rate appeared on the monitor. Gina adjusted the controls for continuous infusion. Vitals are responding, said the nurse, watching intently. But the prince's breathing flattened. They were induced into sedation. Gina tapped the monitor. Coma in progress. A controlled sedation, she whispered. Sophie closed her eyes and prayed softly. In the early morning hours, Sophie stayed by the bedside. The prince slept deeply. The monitors now showed stable rhythm and oxygen levels. Gina remained quietly at her side. Sophie finally whispered, He's safe, for now. Gina nodded, eyes tired. Yes, but we must keep him under observation for 72 hours. If he wakes, he'll need care and slow tapering. Sophie held Gina's hand. Thank you, friend. For everything, Gina squeezed back. We all did right. Jumong and Elias joined them quietly. Outside, in the hallway, they stepped aside for a hushed strategy session. Jumong whispered, we need to catch Nurse Shin and Dr. Han. Bring them in. But I don't want the hospital to collapse. Elias nodded. We can run an internal investigation, ensure no leaks, no press. Use surveillance logs. This is too much for my wife, Jumong told Elias. I need to take her on vacation until the baby is born. Elias nodded in agreement. It was 3 days after Prince Hamza's miraculous recovery. The atmosphere at Seoul Medical Center had returned to calm, but with silent purpose behind the scenes. By evening, Nurse Shin and Dr. Han were escorted out in handcuffs. Dr. Min delivered the final blow. Your medical licenses are terminated. You'll face legal consequences. The corridor fell silent as they left, private yet pivotal justice having been delivered. That same morning, Sophie nearly collapsed in the presidential suite, her doctor's hands shaking as exhaustion set in. Her phone rang. It was the King of Jordan. His voice, grave and warm, filled the room. Dr. Lee, he began, my son is well. He thanked me this morning. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes as she replied, I'm so grateful, Your Majesty. He's stable and healing well. The king continued, To show our gratitude, we are funding 1,000 scholarships through your foundation to support children in Namibia and beyond. Sophie felt her heart soar. That scholarship meant so much. It was her dream, finally, taking root. "Thank you," she whispered. "This will change so many lives." That afternoon, Sophie shared the news with Jumong. He gently took her hand and reminded her of their promise made the day they married in Namibia. 1 week later, Sophie's mother landed from Namibia. The scent of herbs and the warmth of a motherly embrace filled the home. Sophie, nearing full term, leaned into Mama for comfort. Mama supported Sophie daily, massaging her feet, preparing nourishing soups, and reciting her traditional lullabies as the baby kicked. At 2 in the morning, Sophie awoke shaking, and Mama was there, steady and calm. Sophie, Jumong, and Mama traveled to Paris so Sophie could give birth in excellent care. Mama was by Sophie's side when baby Liam Chivazi Lee entered the world, screaming once, then quieting in Sophie's arms. Jumong wept quietly. "He is perfect," he whispered. Sophie closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks. Mama cradled her new grandson gently. 2 months later, they returned to South Korea. In the hospital garden, under a gentle sun, staff and family gathered for the baptism celebration. Chairman Lee and his brother Dong Hyun stood proudly in suits. Gina, Elias, Dr. Min, Mama, each held gifts, flowers, and gratitude. A sign read, "Welcome home, Liam Chivhase Lee." They formed a circle around Sophie and Jumong. Sophie dipped her hands in the font and sprinkled holy water over Liam. "Sophie," Jumong whispered softly, "you've given him grace." She nodded, tears pooling. Scene 7. New school, new hope. Later that week, they unveiled the new educational wing by the hospital, a middle school and budding university. A banner read, 1,000 scholarships dedicated by the King for Sophie Lee Foundation. Jumong cut the ribbon. Sophie beamed as children cheered. Mama wiped tears from her eyes. They held a video call with Prince Hamza, smiling and in good health. As they clapped, Elias and Gina warmly hugged, and Elias whispered, "Are ready to walk down the aisle next week." She smiled as tears of joy formed around her eyes. Chairman Leia and Dong Hyun watched him like a miracle. The camera pulled back, a baby sleeping in a cradle, a mother and father standing by his side, and a grandmother smiling in the doorway. Hope, prayer, and family, their story had arrived at a tender end. Sometimes the battles we face are not just in the operating room or in the headlines, they're in the heart. This story taught me that faith, integrity, and quiet courage can shake even the coldest systems. That true strength doesn't shout. It shows up even when your feet are tired and your hands are trembling. And above all, prayer and purpose are powerful foundations for healing, for love, and for legacy. Now it's your turn. What life lesson did you take from Sophie and Jumong's journey? I'd love to know what spoke to your heart. And with this, we come to the end of Sophie and Jumong's story, a journey of faith, healing, and love. They faced storms but built a life rooted in prayer, purpose, grace.